Hello everyone, welcome to tonight's journey. Tonight we begin our descent into justice, injustice, and especially the abuse of systems, the motif of wrongly judged, convicted without evidence. The Roman Empire, where torture wasn't just brutal, it was operatic. Slice open a donkey, shove the convict inside, sew it up, cut off his manhood, bury alive, throw them into a cauldron and light a fire beneath. And let's not forget the Persians, the sacrificial punishments, Rome, China, Maya, the Middle East, the Mongols, and certain European medieval execution manuals. Before we begin, if you truly find this a comfortable place to take shelter at night, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if you truly want to. No pressure. It's like an old tavern law. You only stay if you need a quiet corner. And you know what I love most? Reading the comments and seeing where you're listening from and what time it is. Whether it's New York or Norway, 1 a.m. or 5 a.m., you're still here, and I see you. Now turn off the lights. Turn on a small fan if you have one, not for heat, just for that soft humming sound. And now, you're here. A basement called Tullianum, where no one cares if you're a thief or a prince. If you're inside, you're a criminal. There's a dripping sound, not the charming ting-ting of payday, but the slow drip from a stone ceiling into a puddle of something. Not sure if it's water or urine. Probably both. Possibly yours. Who knows anymore? You open your eyes. In front of you is a wall blackened with mold, stone cold as the heart of someone stripped of honor, an air thick like someone roasted a pile of rats and shut the door. Congratulations. You're in the Tullianum, an underground prison, also known as the side exit from life itself. No one comes in here to get out. You're no exception. You try to move. Mistake. Rope scrapes against your wrist like a dull blade. Your hands are tied behind your back. Your feet are shackled. And not the shiny Hollywood kind of shackles. It's two chunks of rusty metal tied together with donkey hide straps. It's heavy, and it's cold. You hear breathing, not yours. You turn your head. To the left, a man curled in the corner whispering, "Mama, Mama, I didn't eat the bread." To the right, a pile of rags. No, not rags. A person. A person not moving. Eyes open, flies buzzing. You're not sure if he's alive. You're not sure you want to know. And there's nowhere left to back away. Above is a vent, as small as a judge's mercy. From it, a blurry beam of light falls directly onto a pile of vomit near your foot. Perfect. You close your eyes, not to meditate, but to keep from crying. You don't remember how you got here. Maybe you took a wrong turn. Maybe you said the wrong thing while someone important was drinking. Maybe you did do something bad, like steal a royal goat. Or worse, you looked a noble straight in the eye. In Rome, you didn't need to do wrong to be imprisoned. You just had to show up at the wrong moment, and in the wrong body. A lock clicks. The iron door screeches like fingernails dragging down a soul. A guard appears, big belly, tiny eyes, whip in hand. He doesn't ask your name, just yells, "Number 14, get up." You don't know you're number 14, but he does. He yanks you up like a sack of flour. Your back hits the wall, your neck hits the stick. You don't even have time to ask. What crime did I commit? Has anyone called a lawyer? Or even, don't I get one phone call? No. You get the right to stand still and not make it worse. He drags you down the hallway. You pass a small chamber. A scream echoes. You can't tell if it's a man or a woman. You just know it wasn't someone ready to die. It was someone not ready, but being forced. You're led down a narrow passage. The sunlight slams into your eyes and makes them shut tight. It's been a while since you saw the sun. Your eyes blur, your ears ring, your legs tremble. You think, am I being released? The guard turns and smiles. A smile like he just smelled appetizers. No, you're being taken to be processed. On schedule, with ceremony, and very Roman flair. You take a breath. Might be the last one as a person not yet reduced to public entertainment. And just like that, a day as a criminal in ancient Rome officially begins. If you ever thought court was a place for justice, law, arguments, and fairness, then I'm sorry. You've been living too close to Netflix and too far from the Roman Empire. Here, a trial takes less time than it takes you to pick a menu item at a fast food joint, and the verdict is written before you even open your mouth. You're dragged out from the darkness of the Tullianum. 2 guards flank you like they're walking a beast to market. The square ahead is packed. Not a market day. No vegetables, no fish. Just hungry eyes, bored faces, and a lot of people chewing on something. Maybe seeds, maybe sausage, maybe the hope you die fast for their amusement. You're shoved to your knees before a stone platform. Sitting above it, legs crossed like sipping tea, is an old man in a white toga with purple trim. The judge, more precisely, a gentleman who holds your life like a wilted scallion. He looks at you for 1.5 seconds, doesn't ask your name, doesn't ask your age, doesn't ask if you have anything to say. His eyes pass through you like you're a chipped mug he forgot in the bathroom last week. Then he turns to the clerk beside him and asks, "The charges?" The clerk unrolls a parchment and replies bluntly, "Disrupting the ceremonial procession, staring at a noble lady, suspected offense against the gods." Your mouth opens, not to argue, but because you honestly don't remember doing anything. You only recall standing near the temple. It was hot. A noble woman wore a sheer dress, and you accidentally looked a bit too long. 2 seconds maybe. The judge raises one hand. The whole square goes silent, like holding breath. He declares, "Mortem est." 1 sentence, 2 words. That's it. The clerk nods and pulls out a list. On it, dozens of names, slashed in red ink. Execution, mild, moderate, and theatrical. Depends on today's schedule. You squint. Your name is next to a note. Public execution includes reenactment of divine wrath. Doesn't sound easy to swallow. You don't understand much Latin, but looking at the people around you, you understand. You've just been sentenced to death. No one claps. No one cries. No one asks, "Should we reconsider?" No. Someone turns to you, pats your shoulder like a goodbye. Quick death hurts less. If not, hope they go with the hungry lion. You're dragged away, past a child eating a pastry. He looks at you like you're part of the show. An old woman counts on her fingers. 3 this morning, 2 in the afternoon. Evening, maybe a burning. Saturn's energy is perfect. You stop hearing clearly. Your ears ring, throat parched, eyes stinging from the sun. But no tears come out, because there's no time left to cry. Justice here moves faster than a June thunderstorm. A gust of wind blows through. Smell of ash, flesh, and death hangs in the air like smoke that won't clear. You breathe. 1, 2, 3. That's how long your trial lasted. 3 breaths. You're not a bad person. You're not a traitor. You were just in the wrong time, wrong glance, wrong situation. In Rome, sometimes the biggest crime is simply existing. Here, justice isn't meant to protect you. It exists to protect an order you are never invited to. You walk away no longer a person. You're part of a performance. A blood and bone banquet they call the judgment of the gods. You thought being sentenced to death was the end. Oh no. In Rome, death is just the final act of the show. Before that, there's rehearsal, featuring torture methods that would make Hades shudder. You're tied up and dragged across the stone floor. Your knees slam against each step like meat being tenderized for porridge. Blood flows. The crowd screams. A sausage vendor shouts, "Buy 1 stick, get 1 torture scene free." Glowing fire, sizzling meat. You're not sure if he's talking about the sausage or about you. You're dragged into a back courtyard, a makeshift execution ground behind the slave market. No stone walls, just the smell of old blood, animal dung, and the strange sound of suffocating silence. In the center stands a massive donkey. Its eyes are dull, its belly unnaturally swollen, its mouth bloody. Before you can process anything, a soldier whistles. Dissection time. 2 men, wearing aprons made of human skin, walk out holding knives. Not surgical tools. These are pig slaughtering blades, the kind that make you want to confess sins from a past life at first glance. They slice open the donkey's belly. Layer after layer of meat, fat, small intestine, large intestine, like unwrapping the most disgusting gift no one asked for. The stench hits you like Pluto farting directly into your face. Then one of them points and says, "Shove him in." You struggle. With your legs only. Your hands have been tied since the reign of Numa Pompilius. You scream, but your voice can't compete with the crowd's applause. They're being served free wine. No one's here for justice. They're here for the meat puppet play. In Rome, the Colosseum is Netflix, and you're the special episode. Some people eat, some bet, some bring their kids for a moral lesson. And you're just trying to breathe inside an animal. They stuff you inside the donkey's belly. Chunks of intestine slap your face like living ropes, hot, damp. And the air is thick with the smell of organs, blood, and truth. They stitch it up, each needle piercing donkey flesh and your own skin. A voice rises. Should we burn it now, or wait until he confesses? Now you get it. This isn't about killing. It's about forcing a confession. In Rome, not offering to the gods is a slight. But disrupting a ceremony? That's an insult to the heavens. Some historians wrote about a man once sewn into a bull, left for fire ants to devour him from within. You, though, you got the budget version with the donkey. Partly because no bulls were available today. Partly because you were too lightweight for the fire ant treatment. Either way, it landed you on the city's low-cost execution list for the things you didn't do, for the people you never met, for gods you couldn't afford to worship. You breathe inside a donkey. to the sound of cruel laughter and fat dripping onto embers, and you begin to speak, not out of fear. If a god were watching, they'd probably be nauseated. But gods don't intervene in politics. And apparently, they were busy today with other cases. You speak because you want to be pulled out before your own body starts to rot. You haven't even finished your second sentence when another soldier taps the donkey's flank. Hey, don't confess too fast. We've got 2 more folks doing this scene today. You thought prison in Rome meant a stone cell, dry bread, counting the days until trial. Wrong. You're a convict, not a citizen, and that puts you on the list of people low enough to be punished in ways no one dares mention over lunch. The donkey dissection penalty isn't for nobles or Rome-registered citizens. It's for rebellious slaves, provincial inmates, and troublemakers not famous enough to be primetime entertainment. No laws protect you, except maybe the law of maximum pain. In the morning, the guards come. No ropes, no axes. They bring a donkey. You're confused. Donkeys are for riding. You'd read somewhere that this punishment came from the East. The Assyrians or Persians once stuffed criminals into animals. But it was Rome that turned it into public art of humiliation. They didn't invent the punishment. They just added an audience and a fire pit softly crackling beneath the belly. Maybe for pulling carts. But no one brings a donkey into a torture chamber. That's what you thought, until you saw the blade. The donkey's belly is sliced open, and you get your hair yanked and your clothes ripped off. Next, you get stuffed into the animal, inches at a time, slippery, stinking, and still warm. Sew him up, the guard orders. The hemp cord tightens across donkey hide. The belly is sealed shut, and you lie curled inside. Air thins, space shrinks. You can no longer hear the guards. Only the beat of your own heart, echoing through guts. Then the fire starts under the donkey's belly. Not too hot. They don't want you to die quickly, just hot enough to encourage cooperation. You scream. No one hears. You punch. Donkey meat absorbs every blow. Many have confessed to crimes that weren't theirs, just to be cut out a little sooner. You, in your desperation, see a cow bone lodged in some intestine, and you bite it like it's hope. In mythology, they say Achilles had a vulnerable heel, but your whole body is a heel. Outside, the guard presses an ear to the donkey's belly. He's still talking. Add more hay to the fire. Not smoky enough, not honest enough. You don't quite remember what you confessed to. You only remember crying with your liver and begging any god who knew your name. Finally, they cut the donkey back open, not out of mercy, but because it was enough. Enough for them to write your sentence, in your own words. They drag you out, eyes blurred, mouth dry, skin blistered. You can't walk anymore, but you've been chosen. Chosen to live on for the next round of torture. You've just crawled out of a donkey's belly, barely catching your breath before being hauled upright. Before you can gather your wits, another soldier, holding a small knife and smiling gently as if about to cut a wedding cake, approaches. This time it's voluntary, got it, he says. And you know there's nothing voluntary about this. This is ancient Rome, a place with courts dedicated solely to matters between your legs. Not everyone gets cut. But if you're guilty of treason, incest, or happen to publicly disgrace a noble, then the cutting isn't just physical punishment, it's symbolic. During Augustus's reign, there was even a law, Lex Julia de Adulteriis Coascendis, stating, adulterers lose citizenship, those guilty of incest lose what makes them men, and if you're a slave, you lose it without any paperwork. Losing that means you're no longer a man. You can't stand in the forum. You can't testify. You're no longer a citizen. You're not just punished. You're erased from history. This punishment isn't just to make you hurt. It ensures others don't dare dream of similar mistakes. It's a performance where you're the unwilling actor, the audience is the public, and the director is Rome. Each drop of blood isn't to punish an individual, but to establish order through silence. Because silence, for the empire, is easier to govern than justice. No one dares look you in the eye afterward, because if they look too long, they'll see themselves, just not yet their turn. Rome doesn't just want to hurt you, it wants you to become a mirror, a warning made of flesh and dripping blood that this empire doesn't need to kill you to win. It just needs to turn you into something no one wants to mention. For nobles, losing honor is enough. For slaves, they must lose blood, skin, and something that doesn't grow back. Rome doesn't forgive. Rome educates. Each castration is a lesson not for the learned, but for the masses who often ask why. This isn't merely a cut. It's a message. Rome doesn't want you dead. It wants everyone to see you living without being yourself. So someone, harboring rebellious thoughts, sits down, grabs their hem, and reconsiders. That wound is a vivid warning, a political theory written with knives and ropes, the journey to the knife, and a feeling no one wants to experience twice. You're bound with your hands behind your back, dragged out to a small courtyard, where a group has already gathered as if waiting for a festival. No music, but there are murmurs, suppressed laughter, and the sound of metal sharpening on stone. The soldiers don't kill you. They just want you to sit down. When you see the curved piece of wood with ropes tied at both ends, you know, that's not a chair. One hand holds your shoulder. The other slides the knife down like a cold breeze in summer. You scream, but the wind carries it away, as if it was never uttered. Why was this punishment once codified into law? In Rome, there were times when castration was used as a lighter sentence instead of death. Better to live as half a man, a philosopher once wrote. But don't trust philosophers when they're not the ones lying on the wooden table. You feel it clearly. Each slice is Rome teaching you that freedom doesn't reside in the heart, but below the waist. You collapse, but it's not over yet. You still have a name, and Rome isn't ready for you to use it one last time. Chapter 6. Buried alive and the muffled screams. You thought you'd been through the worst, until you see the shovel. It's not as sharp as a knife, but it carries the weight of hundreds of years of Roman law. Stand still, or we'll have to stake you down, a soldier says, very gently, as if about to plant an orange tree. No one talks about death here. They talk about disappearance, a method quite favoured during Nero's time, a man who enjoyed poetry and burying others underground. When earth is no longer mother, but judgment. In Rome, not everyone had the privilege of being buried alive. Sounds strange, but it's true. Only the voiceless, the poor women, slaves, religious prisoners, had the qualities to endure this punishment. Nobles were different. They had money for ransom, family in the Senate, or at least the option of honorable suicide, a cleaner death than having one's head buried like an out-of-season onion. In Rome, the pit didn't just bury people, it buried justice, if you lacked the status to demand it. Being buried alive wasn't meant to kill immediately. It was a silent stage, where the victim was buried up to the neck, head protruding like a moaning stone statue. No one approached. No one offered water. No one was allowed to pity. You see the sky bluer because it's the only thing left to see, and death is the only thing not in a hurry. Nero and Rubria, death without blades. Even before Nero's time, being buried alive was a religious ritual, not just a punishment, especially for the Vestal virgins, those sworn to chastity while serving the goddess Vesta. According to sacred law, their blood must not be shed. So if they broke their vow, Romans couldn't kill them with swords or hang them. They had to choose a bloodless execution, burial alive. It was a legitimized death under the guise of divinity, a way not just to punish, but to appease the gods angered by impurity. Emperor Nero was among the first to legitimize this punishment, not just for treason, but especially for virgins who broke their vows while serving. One recorded case, Rubria, a defiled virgin, was ordered by Nero to be buried alive in a small cave, head protruding above the ground. No blade, no blood. Only breath and sunlight, and loneliness, lasting many days. Rubria didn't die because of her crime. She died because she was left alone with her guilt in silence. Why is being buried alive more terrifying than being burned? According to records by Tacitus and Suetonius, many cases of live burial were documented, mostly women. A notable case is Cornelia, a Vestal virgin buried alive despite no clear evidence. She wasn't judged by law, but by public suspicion and the ruler's fear. Just one accusation, and you had enough reason to disappear underground, and no one dared dig you up to ask, because you hear yourself dying. Every second, every minute, you smell the earth, hear the flies, feel ants crawling over your eyes without being able to blink. You can't scream, because every scream is muffled by the earth. Rome doesn't need you to die quickly. Rome just needs you unable to plead. No blades, no evidence, only a pit and silence. And after a few days, when your head no longer moves, people consider it over. You'll be remembered, not by name, but by the spot where a pit once held someone. You thought being buried alive was the worst ending. Welcome to Rome's version of human hot pot, where the temperature's enough to cook your organs and the smell isn't too far off from a guilty BBQ. Not everyone had the honor of being beheaded or stabbed. Some were thrown straight into a vat of boiling oil because they needed to be cooked, not just killed. Why? Because Rome didn't just need you dead. It needed you to stink. That burning stench, fat, singed hair and charcoal, was the symphony of power. This wasn't just punishment. It was a performance. The square packed with people, boiling oil bubbling in an iron cauldron, guards shoveling bare bodies into it like lamb into the oven. The screams couldn't drown out the cheers. You didn't just die, you entertained the empire. Political criminals, those dangerous to Roman thought. Slaves who dared rebel, like Spartacus once did. Early Christians, seen as heretics. Rome didn't kill you because you were wrong. Rome killed you because you were different. And if you ended up in the vat, it was because Rome needed your scent to smother the spread of dissent. In fact, boiling oil wasn't Rome's own invention. This punishment is believed to have originated from Eastern civilizations, especially Assyria and Persia. There, cooking a living person was seen as a divine display, a way to show the world that the criminal had been melted, both body and soul. Rome, with its love of pragmatism and performance, adopted and upgraded. They turned religious rituals into open-air theatres. They turned divine judgment into public politics. One famous legend is the execution of St. John the Apostle. According to early Christian records, he was once thrown into a vat of boiling oil near the Roman gate, under the order of Emperor Domitian. But strangely, he didn't die. St. John reportedly stepped out of the vat completely unharmed, terrifying the crowd and turning himself into a symbol of indestructible faith. You might melt from sin, but if you survive the boiling oil, Rome has to bow to you. According to records by Cassius Dio and some writings from Constantine's time, the boiling oil punishment was used, though not as common as hanging or crucifixion. Some legends mention large bronze vats heated underneath by forest wood, sometimes with added pine resin for a special scent. If being buried alive was a death in solitude, boiling oil was a death with an audience. According to modern medical descriptions, burning human skin smells like a mix of burnt hair, animal fat, hot rubber, and rotting meat. Forensic doctors say, it's a smell you never forget. Once you smell it, it sticks in your memory like grease to a frying pan. So in Rome, it wasn't just you who died. The spectators died too, a little bit, in memory. Welcome to the Colosseum, where you don't just lose your life, you lose your dignity, your humanity, and if you're not quick enough, your legs. That day, it's so hot the dust reeks of sunlight. You're standing behind the iron gate, the smell of animal dung and old blood choking your nose. You don't know your opponent, lion, bear, or maybe just the silence before the screams. An imaginary journal, a few minutes before stepping out. Mum, if I come back with my head still on, it'll probably be just to bow it down. The guard said there are fewer spectators today. I thought that was lucky, but then I remembered. Romans don't need a crowd. They just need blood. If I can't scream later, it's because my neck's gone numb before the roar even starts. The iron gate screeches behind you. The sand beneath your feet is still damp with someone else's blood. In front, tens of thousands of eyes. And somewhere, an African lion licking its lips. You used to fear the stage. Now the stage fears you, because it knows you're about to become its backdrop. Before you're tossed out like breakfast, you might have been prepared at a gladiator school called a ludus. This isn't gym class, it's a death rehearsal camp. At Ludus Magnus, the famous training center near the Colosseum, slaves, prisoners of war, and even volunteers, yes really, were taught how to fall beautifully, how to raise a weapon so the crowd roars, and most importantly, how to die on cue when the background music hits. Being a gladiator wasn't a long-term job, but in Rome, dying well was a form of public art. Prisoners of war to send a message. Defy Rome. Here's what happens. Criminals. Rome didn't like overcrowded prisons, but had plenty of tigers. Heretics, especially early Christians, treated as tiger snacks. In Rome, people weren't judged to educate. They were judged to sell tickets. Prisoners of war to send a message. Defy Rome. Here's what happens. Criminals. Rome didn't like overcrowded prisons, but had plenty of tigers. Heretics, especially early Christians, treated as tiger snacks. In Rome, people weren't judged to educate. They were judged to sell tickets. Truth. They weaponized animals. You think tigers and lions just roar? Wrong. They were starved for days before the fight, then led in so hungry they couldn't tell you from pork. Many accounts say animals were stuffed with blood-soaked rags to trigger frenzy. Prisoners were smeared with oil or honey, dessert style. Some were tied to wooden mannequins so beasts could handle them efficiently. The arena wasn't a place where you fought beasts. It was a place where you became raw instinct. Don't think the crowd came to see you fight. They came for panem et circenses, bread and circuses. Roman rulers knew, when people are fed and entertained, they'll forget injustice for a while. So every clap in the arena was a nail sealing the coffin of rebellion. Not because they loved violence, but because they were programmed to see it as normal. Your death was the tool to keep Rome quiet. When the crowd cheered, it wasn't just a reaction, it was a baptism in blood. Philosopher Seneca once said, "What we despise in life we applaud when it's staged." And Rome staged it all. You don't die alone. You die in the cheers of civilization. When the crowd cheered, it wasn't just a reaction. It was a baptism in blood. Philosopher Seneca once said, "What we despise in life we applaud when it's staged." And Rome staged it all. You don't die alone. You die in the cheers of civilization. Imagine you're screaming as something chews your leg off, and someone in the stands is picking their teeth, commenting, "That guy doesn't know how to dodge left. Watch the bestiari, man." Bestiari, those who volunteered or were forced to fight wild beasts in the arena. Not all were killed right away. Some were trained to survive a few minutes, or even kill the beast, and if lucky, get spared, to fight again next week. They were seen as heavy-duty entertainers, willing to risk death for freedom, fame, or just one more day alive, in a world where surviving the morning was an achievement. Bestiarii were both victims and fallen heroes. According to historians Suetonius and Tacitus, venatio, beast hunts, were regular events. The Colosseum once brought in hundreds of species, from African leopards, Syrian bears, rhinos, even giraffes. In one match, over 11,000 animals were killed, just for fun. And you, a human being, how much were you worth? The arena didn't just kill you, it taught the crowd how to enjoy death. And when you stepped out, you weren't a person anymore. You were garnish on Rome's feast of instincts. You were the beast breakfast, and Rome was the chef. The Roman Empire didn't like to wait. If you didn't die on cue, someone would help you, speed things up. You think torture is impulsive. In Rome, death was an art form, inherited, adjusted, and crafted like architecture. From Greece, they learned how to flay skin to send a message. From Egypt, they inherited techniques of execution by insects or blood-draining fire. From the Persians, they learned burial alive, boiling, and stretching the pleasure of violence to near religious ritual. Historian Herodotus recounted the punishment scaphism, gutting and stuffing a body with honey and milk, then letting flies slowly eat the victim inside a boat, which shocked the East. But Rome, they upgraded it to a ticketed event, in a place where philosophy walked hand in hand with chains. The art of death wasn't just about power. It left behind an aesthetic impression of authority. This is a world where philosophy came with scalpels, and beauty never stood apart from blood. You think Rome executed out of anger? No. They calculated every groan, every cut, as if it were policy. For rebellious slaves, slow death was a warning to 100 others. For nobles committing treason, it was a public stain, to stop the Senate from even dreaming of factions. For those who offended the gods, prolonged execution was a way to appease the divine. With blood, every minute you're not dead is a minute Rome is fortifying its power. You weren't just killed, you were used to educate society. Not only the executed were victims, the audience was tortured too, but in small, steady doses until blood became normal. Roman children were often brought to executions as a rite of passage. Nobles discussed philosophy next to the execution floor, eating while watching. Some came out of curiosity, but later became addicted to the suspense, like watching pro wrestling today. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, once wrote, "We applaud death, then go home for lunch." That's how Rome nurtured a population both emotionally numb and fearful of the state. You think being hung upside down just makes you dizzy. In Rome, they hung you by the ankles, head down to the ground, in the middle of a square, and left you there. Blood rushed to the brain. Your vision sparkled, and if you didn't pass out, a sword from below would handle the rest. Not quick punishment, but punishment with rhythm, with a prelude, with a climax, skinning, inch by inch, scream by scream. Is it real? Sadly, yes. Records speak of traitors, political criminals, or those who blaspheme the gods being skinned alive, usually starting at the shoulders, down the back, or belly, not to kill, but to expose guilt. So all of Rome could see, this is the skin of someone who went against order. The crime became a message sealed with the smell of burning human skin under the sun. No yawning, burn slowly. Don't think fire means a quick death. If they wanted you to hurt longer, they'd start burning from the feet upward, with hot coals, not blazing cinematic fire. Coals burn slowly, hot enough to keep you conscious, enough to erase your sense of time, but let you remember every inch of burning flesh. Why must execution be prolonged? Because Rome was a giant stage, and every execution was choreographed like a grand performance. A man tied to a wheel, spinning slowly to the sound of trumpets. Another dragged across hot sand, under the noon sun. A traitor smeared with pitch, then burned as a living torch to light the streets at night. The crowd didn't just watch, they cheered, hollered even, chose the ending. To Rome, death was an entertainment investment, no different from watching a movie today, except the film was shot in real blood. When killing isn't the goal, but the experience. In the arena, death was the ending. The main act was your performance. Fall too soon. The crowd whistles. Survive too long without screaming. You get thrown a weapon. In a society where the crowd's feelings mattered more than the individual's life, you, the dying one, were just an unwilling actor. Rome knew how to honor those deemed worthy and quietly bury those who shouldn't be remembered. If you were executed but weren't a noble, not a Roman citizen, or simply committed a crime that made the crowd gag instead of clap, sorry, you had no grave, no tombstone, no name, just one destination, particularly the gate of the nameless dead. Particularly didn't happen by accident. It started during the Republic era, originally as a burial ground for plague victims. But like everything in Rome, its original function was soon optimized. After slave revolts, like Spartacus's, thousands of bodies were dumped here. When famine, plague, or riots broke out, the unworthy dead were gathered and thrown down like trash. Rome didn't cremate or sprinkle ashes, because particularly wasn't about passage. It was where the empire dumped what it no longer wanted to see. Not everyone got thrown into particularly. Only those no longer seen as whole human beings in Rome's eyes. Slaves guilty of severe crimes, especially betrayal or rebellion. Foreigners without citizenship, even if they lived their whole lives in Rome. Prostitutes, stage actors, seen as impure, banned religious believers, like early Christians, and those stripped of citizenship or declared enemies of the state. In Rome, you weren't just expected to live rightly, you had to die, worth burying. Located on the eastern edge of Rome near Esquiline, particularly was where unclaimed bodies ended up. No funeral, no relatives, no prayers, only corpses tossed layer by layer, mixed with dung, garbage, ashes and urine. The pit was so deep, some said dying here was worse than execution. At least in the arena, you saw the sky one last time. The air was thick, smelled like rotten meat mixed with cat poop. At best you'd vomit, at worst pass out. Even guards pinched their noses with vinegar-soaked cloth. No one wanted to work here, so the job was given to slaves or those considered uncleanable. Death doesn't erase you, but if you're dumped into particularly, Rome ensured you left nothing behind. Not everyone forgot. Some would quietly come to particularly at dusk to whisper goodbye. They weren't allowed to cry out. No candles. But someone left a small stone, etched with a personal symbol, an initial. A mark scratched with a fishbone. A red thread tied to a twig. Guards would destroy them, but some marks survived, excavated by archaeologists. Over 1,500 nameless human remains have been found at Esquiline. But those stones were proof of love, more persistent and secret than the empire. Thousands once lived, groaned, wept, now turned to layers in a pit. Rome didn't write their history. Rome only recorded the ones worth remembering. If you want to live forever in Rome, win or die, with a name big enough to be carved into stone. Otherwise, welcome to the gate of the nameless dead. And if you ever hear a faint moan from underground, it's not the wind, it's just history, digesting one more soul. The Romans were not short on creativity when it came to torture, and more terrifyingly, many of these methods were real, with clear historical records. Crucifixion, nailing your hands and feet to a large wooden cross, leaving you to bleed, dehydrate, and slowly suffocate over several days. Publicly applied to slaves, blasphemers, or anyone Rome deemed in need of an example. Flagrum, a leather whip embedded with metal hooks, fish bones, or heavy lead at the ends. Each lash would tear flesh, sometimes exposing bone. Burning alive, the victim was tied to a wooden post, oil poured around their feet, then ignited to become a living torch. Nero famously used prisoners as garden lights during evening feasts. Body stretching, binding hands and feet to 4 rotating wheels turning in opposite directions. The sound of joints cracking wasn't unusual. It was the background music. They didn't need Hollywood-style fake blood. They had the real thing. And audiences demanded increasingly authentic experiences. In Rome, torture wasn't a clandestine affair. It was conducted publicly with props, background music, often screams, an orchestra, the crowd, and sometimes actual fireworks, literally burning people alive. Not confessing, tied to a post, whipped 100 times, interspersed with cheers of "sing some more." Accused of blasphemy, fitted with a red-hot iron mask of a deity, symbolism and third-degree burns. A slave, tied to a frame, finger joints dislocated one by one. Think they were insane? Not really. They were just accustomed to it. Romans lived in a world where death, slavery and war were daily occurrences. From a young age, they saw people hanged in markets, heads of executed criminals on spears, and heard fun execution stories from parents like fairy tales. A culture of violence was nurtured as a spiritual diet, and gradually they lost the ability to perceive cruelty. Children were taken to executions instead of parks. Families held picnics right in the arena. Crowds cheered as heads fell like fireworks. After witnessing enough deaths, you no longer see it as an end. You see it as the necessary climax of a script. Romans weren't evil. They just lived in a civilization where mercy had no place in first-class tickets. Romans had a very straightforward taste in entertainment. They didn't want pretense. They wanted real blood, real screams, and real endings. Comedy. Better if the actor actually breaks a leg on stage. Tragedy. Better if the condemned truly dies in the final scene. There was no boundary between performance and reality, because reality was dramatic enough without a script. One reason Romans enjoyed torture so much was it was like TV. In a world without Netflix, HBO, or TikTok, the only thing that entertained you was someone being burned alive right in front of you. No actors, no CGI. Just real blood and the smell of burning hair. Emperors like Commodus or Caligula ordered executions during feasts for amusement. A severed head landing in a grape platter was entirely possible. And the crowd? They ate popcorn, the ancient kind, maybe seed cakes or raisins, and chatted. Today's guy screamed loudly. Not as much as yesterday's prisoner. He rolled 3 times, remember? In a society without movies, torture became real-life cinema. Comparing with other civilizations, when Greece contemplated, Rome bled. What made Rome special wasn't that they invented torture. They weren't the first. In Egypt, offenders could be severely punished, but it happened behind stone doors, under the eyes of deities. In Persia, there were bizarre execution methods, but mostly for deterrence, not amusement. In Greece, if you were too bloodthirsty, you'd be seen as uneducated. Greeks preferred debates over beheadings. But Rome was different. Rome turned torture into a TV show. They had scripts, they had props, they had stages, and above all, they had loyal audiences. If you've ever wondered why Rome dominated for centuries, the answer might lie here. They didn't need to kill anyone. just needed others to see you being killed. Public torture was Rome's way of saying, we can do anything, and you can't stop us. Each cut, burn, crush was a reminder of the empire. Each scream, a message broadcasted through sight and smell. Each corpse, a propaganda poster. You wouldn't forget that scene. Rome didn't want you to forget. Romans didn't just watch from the sidelines. They cheered, they shouted, they bet on who'd break bones first. Sometimes they decided, kill or spare. Meaning, to survive, you didn't just need to please the executioner. You had to perform well, so the crowd would like you. Better to be impaled than be mocked as stiff as a log. Rome built an entire industry around pain, and at its center was you, not a citizen, not a person, but content. In modern times, you are convicted when there is physical evidence, witnesses, cameras, but in Rome, I dreamed he was a traitor to the gods. That man walks not like a true citizen. His eyes look strange, must be plotting something. That was enough to get you arrested, tied up, and thrown into a sequence of political entertainment where everyone already knew the ending. In times of Roman crisis, an assassination, a rebellion, or even just a mild increase in bread prices, then a guilty one would suddenly appear, naturally, as if by fate. In truth, it was an ancient misdirection trick. The emperor needed to prove he was still in control. Provincial governors needed to reassure the public. The crowd needed blood to forget their hunger. And you, someone who had never committed anything, suddenly became the symbol of rebellion that had to be crushed. An unjust sentence could make an entire city applaud because it was retold as a political victory. Not everyone had the same entertainment value. In Rome, slaves, foreigners, artists, and philosophers were perfect bait for the punishment system. They had no powerful families to protect them. They often looked unusual, and worst of all, they said things Romans didn't want to hear. A Gaul singing the Latin hymn off-key, likely to be tossed into the arena. A Greek philosopher teaching his students critical thinking. That night he might sleep in jail, or never sleep again. And for slaves, silence itself was a crime, because Rome wanted them silent and obedient with a smile. Every day, at the forum or in the arena, lists were read aloud. No prior notice, no lawyer. Some were eating bread. Some were just hugging their children good morning. Then, your name was called, and that was it. Guilty because chosen. Guilty for not being quiet enough. Guilty for making others feel uncomfortable. Rome didn't need thorough interrogation. They had something called emotional judgment. You tremble, probably guilty. You cry. Exactly. Criminals cry a lot. You're calm. That's suspicious behavior. Must be hiding something. You were the victim of an ancient operating system run by prejudice and adrenaline. Some mornings the government just needed a laugh or to ease public unrest. What to do? Drag out some criminals. Didn't matter what they'd done. And let the crowd decide. Who wants to see blood today? This is Gaius. He didn't clap during the emperor's celebration. Execute. The crowd. Execute. And then you no longer had a name, only a scream, and the smell of burning hair. Some were executed for offending the gods, some for being too beautiful, some for being literate which made them suspicious. Rubria, a priestess during Nero's reign, was buried alive for possibly breaking a vow in the future, which meant she hadn't done it, but looked like she might, and that was enough. You could be good. You could keep your head down. You might just want a peaceful day. But when someone needed a sacrifice, you didn't need to commit a crime. You just had to stand in the wrong place. You didn't live in Roman society. You were background content for the crowd. A slave burned, so people forgot about the rising taxes. A citizen crucified to commemorate a holiday. A teacher tortured for teaching a philosophy not aligned with the regime. And if you wondered, why did they choose me? The answer was, because today, no one else had been chosen yet. You thought everything ended when your name vanished from the list. You thought when your body was thrown into a ravine or burned in a cauldron of oil, you disappeared. Rome tried and failed. People carved the names of victims into stone, on pillars, on the backs of statues, under the feet of the gods, not to honor, but to whisper, "We haven't forgotten." Even though the emperor forbade it, even though the law punished it harshly, those tiny letters still appeared like moss after rain. Someone scratched with a fingernail. Someone wrote with charcoal. Someone whispered to a stone wall. He wasn't guilty. When you execute a person in front of 10,000 people, you create 10,000 memories. Some are afraid, some are thrilled, but some remember. There are children who grow up and ask, why did Uncle Gaius disappear that day? There are mothers who say, don't stand too close to the soldiers. Your father just looked the wrong way. Rome didn't anticipate this. A scream, even silenced, still stays in the hearts of the living. You can't tell the truth in the square. You tell it at the dinner table. You whisper it in the night. You pretend to talk to the cat and let your child overhear. Rome taught people, forgetting is loyalty. But who can truly forget the sob of an innocent person? Some were erased from records, but not erased from the dreams of a child who once saw them being dragged away. Not everyone died. Some escaped. Some survived torture. Some faked their deaths. And they told, in letters, in poems, in handwritten copies hidden beneath godly statues. Rome could destroy temples, burn books, exile citizens. But Rome couldn't bury every memory, because memory doesn't live in the skull. It lives in the glance, in the handshake, in the sharp phrase, don't let that happen again. They thought they ended you. But as long as someone still says your name, you're still here. No monument needed, no official remembrance. Just one person whispering, he wasn't guilty. And that's enough for history to fail to bury you, no matter how many pits Rome digs, or how much ash they scatter. Because history, even when written in blood, can still hear the cries from the ashes. You think things like arenas, torture, and public executions were buried with the stones of the Colosseum. Well, technically yes. But if you look a little closer, look at your phone, at the television, at the wall of someone's house spray-painted with the words traitor, you'll see. Rome never really disappeared. It just changed outfits. Rome had arenas where people screamed in blood and sand. We have the internet, where you hit share on a video of a kid being bullied because he's dumb and deserves it. Rome had crowds cheering when someone was torn apart. We have live stream commentators playing funny music when someone gets beat up. Rome had slaves, rebels, virgins buried alive, criminals stripped naked in public. We have cancel culture, character assassination, psychological attacks, doxing, and laughing emojis under funeral posts. You've read about public trials in Rome, right? That's when guilt didn't need proof. Just someone shouting, "That guy insulted the emperor," and the swords flashed. Today, all it takes is a 7-second clip, a clickbait caption, a trending hashtag, and you're sentenced. Rome had laws. So do we. But laws, as Rome once understood, aren't what stop injustice. They're the coat that makes injustice look legal. Do you think you're different from the Romans? Do you believe that if you lived? Back then, you'd speak out against torture. You wouldn't cheer as someone was torn apart by lions. Okay, but today, do you close the live stream when someone's being humiliated? Do you report the video of someone getting slapped for their gender? Do you speak up when someone's being stoned online? Or do you scroll down to read the comments? History is a convex mirror. It doesn't reflect us exactly, but it magnifies the ugliest parts of our face. Rome may have fallen, but the pleasure of watching others suffer still remains. Rome killed with swords, we kill with shares. Rome burned books, we burn people with a glance. The Greco-Roman period, 146 BCE, 324 CE. The Greco-Roman period marked a turbulent new chapter in the history of ancient Greece, spanning nearly 5 centuries, from 146 BCE to 324 CE. This era began with the Roman conquest of Greece, ending the republic and independence that the Greeks had long fought to preserve. From then on, Greece entered a new era, an era of profound cultural convergence and major social transformations. Even though it was conquered, Greece was not entirely assimilated by Rome. The Romans, who deeply admired the brilliant Greek civilization, adopted a relatively moderate policy of governance. Greek, the language of literature, philosophy, and science, remained the official language in the eastern part of the empire. Although Greek cities lost their autonomy, they were allowed to maintain local governmental structures and continue economic development. Roman rule brought Greece a period of stability and prosperity. Transportation routes were built and improved, connecting Greece to the vast trade networks of the empire. Grand Roman architecture appeared, interwoven with ancient Greek structures, bearing witness to a unique cultural fusion. The Greco-Roman period witnessed a special blend between two great civilizations. Greek culture, with its immense legacy in philosophy, art, and science, profoundly influenced Roman society. Conversely, the Greeks also absorbed Roman cultural elements, especially in law, administration, and military engineering. No death knell rang for Athens, no mourning song, no crumbling statue marked the fall of a civilization. Only the wind blew through the grey-white columns that were once the pride of the ancient world, and in that wind was a silent cry for help. In 146 BCE, Rome defeated the Achaean League. Corinth was destroyed. Athens shed no blood that day, but it bowed its head, not because of weapons, but because of a simple truth. Its time had passed, but that truth had started long before. Since the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE, when Thebes defeated Sparta and seized leadership of Greece, the order among the city-states began to shake. Sparta weakened. Athens leaned more toward culture than military, and other city-states fought for influence in a spiral of internal wars, leading to a long century of decline. Even when Alexander the Great rose from Macedonia, Athens was no longer the center of power. It was admired, imitated, but no longer a leader. And when Alexander died, Greece did not unite, but fell into a series of wars between generals, leaving Athens a shadow of its former self. You must picture a city that once taught the world how to think, now standing still like a teacher replaced by his own students, with swords and iron armor. The statue still stood, the books still lay on the shelves. The old philosophers still debated in the agora, but their words no longer echoed as before, because the most frightening thing is not being erased. It is being preserved as a living relic with no power to decide its own fate. Athens was not burned like Troy, not gutted like Carthage. It was preserved like a painting hung in someone else's palace. And from then on, it became an open museum of itself. Someone once said, Greece was the last great civilization that knew it was dying. It didn't die from losing a battle. It died from no longer being heard. And nothing is crueler in human history than silence toward what was once worshipped. If you can imagine the afternoon light falling on the Parthenon, where offerings were once made to Athena every year, then you can also hear it. A sigh swallowed by stone. But what's astonishing is, just when everything seemed over, something absurd happened. Rome, the conqueror, began to learn from Athens. The one wearing military boots sat down as a student. The one who broke down the gates quietly copied books of philosophy. And from that, Athens began a new chapter, not as the capital of a nation, but as the capital of intellect in an empire that did not belong to it. Greek civilization did not disappear. It blended into the blood of its conquerors. Normally, when an empire conquers a land, one expects bloodshed, fallen monuments, and identities forced to kneel. But that didn't quite happen to Greece. Rome did not come with a raised sword to destroy civilization. They came with a gaze of admiration, almost longing, toward a world they had never created, but secretly wished to possess. Not just the land, but the refinement. The way Greeks conversed in courtyards, wrote poetry under olive trees, and debated death as if it were a philosophical experiment. From the 2nd century BCE, Romans entered Greek city-states like warriors who had heard of the old teacher of the world. And then they really began to listen, listening to Plato, listening to Homer, listening to things that even the Greeks themselves had begun to forget in the smoke of civil war. An absurd thing. The victor was the one more influenced. Even Marcus Tullius Cicero, Rome's greatest orator, once admitted he was shaped by Greek philosophy. Cicero didn't just read Plato. He considered Greek philosophical lectures the soul's enlightenment for Rome. In a letter, he once called Athens the torch of human thought, and it was he who brought that torch back to the Roman Forum. Romans began speaking Greek in the Eastern Empire. Senators learned Stoic philosophy from those once deemed losers. Every saying of Aristotle was copied, translated, spread, as if Greece had not been conquered, but was dissolving into Rome like old wine in a new jar. In Athens, philosophical schools didn't close. On the contrary, they became pilgrimage sites for Rome's upper class. A noble youth wanting to learn how to be a man didn't go to Rome, but to Athens. Thus, Athens, once thought to be a museum, became the school of the empire. Even Roman emperors couldn't resist the allure. Hadrian, who ruled in the early 2nd century, was a Philhellene, a lover of Greek culture to the point of obsession. Not only did he restore the temple of Olympian Zeus, but he built a massive library named after himself in the heart of Athens. That wasn't a political act. It was a quiet confession that, even while sitting on the throne of the mightiest empire on earth, he still wished to stand at the edge of Athens, like a student gazing up at an old teacher. This conquest didn't come with fire. It came with obsession, with a cultural insecurity the Romans never dared to admit. They might master the world, but not its soul. Hard to believe, but with every Roman step past a Greek temple, they brought back a replica, not as spoils of war, but as spiritual property, copied and spread across the Mediterranean. From the Pantheon in Rome to every triumphal arch, every column, there stood the shadow of Athens, of Delphi, of Ionic pillars recarved in Italian stone by people who didn't speak Greek, but dreamed the same ideals. Even after the Western Roman Empire fell, Athens remained the place where the light of knowledge still shone one last time. Philosophical academies, like Plato's Academy or the Lyceum, continued to operate nearly 600 years after Christ, until Emperor Justinian of Eastern Rome ordered the closure of pagan schools in 529, extinguishing the last candle of classical philosophy. You can imagine that final classroom. An old teacher reading Plato to a few grey-bearded students under a roof chipped with time. Outside, a new empire was being built on different beliefs. But inside that room, Athens wasn't dead. And then, as a fateful paradox, when Rome collapsed centuries later, what remained wasn't fortresses, but the Greek legacy, in the blood of those who once conquered it. So one could say, Rome defeated Greece by force, but Greece defeated Rome with memory. That memory didn't die. It became the foundation of Western civilization. And from that, Athens, though silent, still speaks in the language of us all. No one decreed that an empire must have schools. Yet Rome somehow created an invisible school with its heart in Athens. Not Rome, not Alexandria, but a conquered, impoverished ancient city that still had the power to teach the world how to think. In Rome, you could learn how to rule, but in Athens, you learned how to exist, how to reason in the face of death, how to question justice, the soul, and even the unprovable. A young Roman entering the classroom of an Athenian philosopher didn't do so for grades, but to learn how to maintain dignity in a world falling apart. The Greeks may no longer have had an army, but they possessed spiritual weapons, and the Romans, strangely, voluntarily, surrendered to those weapons. Stoicism, Neoplatonism, skepticism were all taught here as core subjects of an ancient university without a nameplate. Figures like Epictetus, a former Greek slave, became spiritual professors, even to Roman generals. Once, in his classroom, he described a very Greek way of living, not letting circumstances determine the soul's value. Arrian, who recorded Epictetus's lectures, recounted that the teacher sat on a wooden chair in a small room with just enough light to see each other. Outside were the tempests of the empire, but inside that classroom, he asked his students, if you lose all possessions, fame, and even your body, what remains? No one answered. But that was the lesson, and that classroom, though not in Athens, was the purest echo of Athens's golden age. Emperor Marcus Aurelius, the author of Meditations, wrote the entire book almost in the mindset of an Athenian student taking lecture notes. From the nobility to the wealthy Roman offspring, studying in Athens was considered the starting point for entering politics. One of the famous Romans who studied in Athens was Cato the Younger, a renowned upright magistrate. In his youth, Cato was sent to Athens to study Stoic philosophy, but he didn't live like a lavish overseas student. On the contrary, he ate only dry bread and olives, wore coarse cloaks, and walked daily to class under the Hellas sun. Once, the Athenians thought he was poor. No one believed a Roman noble descendant would choose to live so simply. But for Cato, that was the life lesson. Virtue doesn't lie in power, but in inner discipline. It's like sending your child to Harvard or Oxford today, except you learn how to die peacefully, not just earn money. Athens became a kind of sacred place for intellectual formation, a Jerusalem of thought. And the places where Athens preserved knowledge didn't resemble modern libraries or schools. The Lyceum, where Aristotle once taught, was just a garden with low stone columns, where teachers and students strolled and discussed. Plato's Academy was near an ancient cemetery, where the solemn atmosphere seemed to teach students how to ponder. And the Stoa Poikile, a colonnaded porch, was where Zeno lectured on Stoicism amidst fishmongers and market guards. No blackboards, no rows of wooden chairs, just ideas, questions, and footsteps. Even when Rome had full control over this land, they allowed these places to exist, unchanged, unflattened, without flags. Perhaps because deep down they knew any place that makes an entire empire fall silent to listen cannot be considered the land of the defeated. And the places where Athens preserved knowledge didn't resemble modern libraries or schools. The Lyceum, where Aristotle once taught, was just a garden with low stone columns where teachers and students strolled and discussed. Plato's Academy was near an ancient cemetery where the solemn atmosphere seemed to teach students how to ponder. And the Stoa Poikile, a colonnaded porch, was where Zeno lectured on Stoicism amidst fishmongers and market guards. No blackboards, no rows of wooden chairs, just ideas, questions, and footsteps. This simplicity made Athens a space that didn't need order, yet still cultivated thought for an entire empire. And then, in a grand paradox, it was Athens, the conquered, that reshaped the conqueror. Not with swords, but with ideas. Not with armies, but with questions that made the entire empire reflect. Those thoughts seeped into every building in Rome, into every oration, into how laws were made, debates held, forums designed. Athens, though old, poor, and with no intact temples, still became the silent capital of intellect. No ruler decreed it so, but everyone bowed their heads upon arrival, because some cities don't need power, they only need memory, and Athens is one of them. For over 600 years, Romans might use Latin to write laws, draft treaties, or command troops. But if they wanted to compose poetry, debate philosophy, or court politely, they switched to Greek. This language story isn't just about speech, it's about soft power, about how a conquered empire conquered back through writing. Greek became the unofficial language of the Roman elite, In Roman theatres, from Rome to Antioch, Greek plays were still performed, sometimes in the original Greek, untranslated. Tragedies like Oedipus Rex, Medea, or Antigone still moved Roman audiences to tears, even if the actors didn't use the empire's language. This shows Romans didn't just admire Greek reason, they were also persuaded by the emotions Greece once brought to the world stage. Cicero read Greek. Marcus Aurelius wrote philosophical notes in Greek. Hadrian, one of the most beloved emperors, was famously enamored with Greek culture to the point of being called Graeculus, the Little Greek. He spoke Greek fluently, often appeared in Greek-style cloaks, and rebuilt many structures in Athens. Notably, Hadrian reconstructed parts of Athens, including the Hadrian Library, a symbol of knowledge. He didn't just rule with power, he ruled by loving and honoring a language not his own. Even in the Senate, Roman senators would cite Homeric poetry to illustrate laws. Athens didn't need to send troops anywhere, just send a language. It didn't plant flags, didn't change coats of arms, but it lived in translations, in libraries, in every Roman proverb Hellenized. In Alexandria, a city where sea and books met, the Library of Alexandria became a center for copying, storing, and translating great works in Greek. Romans didn't destroy it upon arrival, but sent scholars to study. Translations of Aristotle, Herodotus, Sophocles spread across provinces. In the library's shadows, Greek ideas were rewritten in Latin, but the spirit remained purely Greek. Across the Mediterranean, from Syrian mansions, Egyptian libraries, to Gaulish noble estates, Greek was the language of the literate, the thinkers, the dreamers. It was like a ticket, not to a throne, but to enlightenment. And so, in a strange paradox, both empires, the conqueror and the conquered, used the same language for what they considered internal. Latin, for the masses, for law, for speeches. Under Emperor Augustus, the restoration of Greek structures became a cultural policy. Especially in Athens, Augustus not only renovated temples, but also built the Horologion of Andronikos, an 8-sided marble water clock tower modeled after Greek astronomy. Instead of demolishing them, he chose to uphold Greek symbols as a way to affirm Rome did not destroy Athens' civilization, but absorbed it to become eternal. Emperor Nero, often remembered for his cruelty, was one of the first Romans to publicly adore Greek culture. He not only studied Greek drama and poetry, but also performed live in ancient Greek cities, including Olympia and Delphi. Nero once claimed to be the reincarnation of Orpheus, the mythical poet and musician. That contradiction between an absolute ruler and the longing to be recognized as a Greek artist shows that Athens' allure surpassed even the throne. The Greeks lost their land, but not their form. The Romans built temples, erected statues, minted coins. But whenever they spoke of beauty, they copied the lines of Athens. In every corner of Rome, from arenas and squares to upper-class gardens, there were statues in Greek style. Replicas of works by Polykleitos, Phidias, Praxiteles were carved identically, not because Rome lacked artists, but because no one dared to alter what had defined the standard. A statue of Apollo stood beside a statue of Jupiter, but everyone knew. One was a copy of the original from Athens, the other a Roman creation. And strangely, the copy was carved from better marble. Meanwhile, in literature, Roman intellectuals were caught in a tug of war, writing in Latin to serve the empire, but quoting Greek to prove they weren't uneducated. Cicero, the representative of the Latin stance, often opened his orations with a line of Homer. Seneca, the Roman philosopher, wrote in Latin but admitted he was directly influenced by the Athenian schools. Even in private letters, many Roman nobles still used Greek because they believed only that language was subtle enough to express emotion, sentiment, and even their fear of the meaninglessness of power. Then, as Christianity rose, a paradox occurred. The New Testament, this faith's core scripture, was not written in Hebrew nor in Latin, but in Greek. From the 1st to 3rd centuries, the earliest scriptures were written in Koine Greek, a common, unrefined form of Greek that spread rapidly across the cities of Asia and the Mediterranean. Theologians like Clement of Alexandria, Origen, and St. Paul all used Greek to preach, write epistles, and engage in philosophical discourse. This turned the language of Athenian philosophers into the foundational material of a new faith, one that not only offered salvation, but evoked the light of reason Athens once kindled. A religion once rejected by Rome, and later embraced as the state religion, began with the language of Athens. No Greek army went out to evangelize, but countless scriptures were handwritten in Alpha and Omega. Stone statues recorded the forms of the gods. Quill pens recorded the shapes of fear, belief, and redemption. A detail often forgotten is, many Roman god statues initially had no Latin names. Instead, their Greek names were engraved on stone pedestals alongside original symbols. Even the Pantheon, the temple honoring the gods, retained much of Greek architectural influence. In religious rituals, Roman priests even recited prayers bilingually, Greek and Latin, as a way to ensure that no god was left out due to a language barrier, and both were borrowed from Athens. Rome thought it conquered the world through power, but then it realized that world only truly bowed before beauty. Zeus became Jupiter. Hera became Juno. Athena became Minerva. But even with new names, those gods still bore the same immovable gaze of millennia, as if they knew not everyone who changes their name can change their fate. Rome, in name, had its own mythological system, but if one looked closely at the statues, temples, rituals, it was Athens wearing a new mask. Many scholars call this divine assimilation, where Greek gods weren't replaced, merely transliterated into Latin. Apollo was a special case. He was the only god to retain his name in both languages, perhaps because even Rome dared not rename the god of light. At the Pantheon, where Roman gods were honored, statues in Greek form still stood in reverence. The Romans did not rebuild from scratch. They merely borrowed Greece's foundation to construct what they thought was theirs. But the soul, which cannot be replicated, still belonged to Athens. In the countryside, locals still use the old names. On ancient graffiti walls, the name Aphrodite was still crudely etched by a soldier's hand, not out of defiance to Rome, but because it was the first name they ever whispered in prayer. At Dura Europos, a Roman town in Syria, hundreds of graffiti lines and carved letters were found in military barracks. Though a Roman colony, many soldiers still carved the names of Greek gods like Ares, Artemis, or Dionysus in Greek letters, alongside vows in their native tongues. Some use both languages, as if, standing between two worlds, they still didn't want to lose their old voice of prayer. In the city of Lebedea, an ancient Greek region, the Romans once allowed the temple of the god Trophonius to continue, a deity with no Latin mythological counterpart. They didn't try to rename or interpret him. They just left it alone. Perhaps because some beliefs ran so deep that any attempt to Romanize them would only strip their soul. The Romans also used a method called interpretatio Graeca, loosely translated as Greek-style interpretation. By this, they tried to understand foreign gods from Egypt, Gaul, Persia, by comparing them to Greek equivalents. Baal was seen as Zeus. Isis was likened to Demeter. Whether for understanding or control, in the end, it was Greece, not Rome, that became the template for reading the spiritual world. In stone engravings, many tablets showed two names for a god, Greek and Roman, placed side by side, like a double-sided name card, one for the emperor, one for the past. Even Roman emperors, when building new temples, often modelled the facades after Greek ones. In Pompeii, after excavation, a temple to Venus was found, but its layout resembled the temple of Aphrodite in Corinth more than any purely Roman architecture. Even within the imperial court, that influence quietly ran deep. Julia Domna, a Syrian empress, wife of Emperor Septimius Severus, was one of the greatest patrons of Greek philosophy and mythology. She revived stage performances of ancient Sophoclean plays, hosted Greek-style rituals in Rome, and maintained a circle of scholars dedicated to studying Orpheus. Under her reign, Greek gods didn't just live in statues. They lived in words, on stage, and within courtly rituals. Roman poets like Ovid, Virgil, when writing about the gods, often reference their origins from Olympus, Delos, or Athens, as if the gods' souls still belonged to the old lands. In Metamorphoses, Ovid painted a world of myth brimming with Greek essence, though told in Latin. Perhaps Rome defeated Athens with weapons, but in the spirit, the Romans worshipped in temples designed by Greeks, prayed to gods with Athenian faces, and named their children after Greek mythology. Names may change, but souls do not. Because some things, even when masked, dressed anew, or rewritten in another dictionary, still whisper in the same voice in your dreams. And the Greek gods still whisper like that. No drums, no chess pieces, no proclamations. Only silent gazes refusing to bow before Caesar's statue. Because not all uprisings begin with swords and spears. Some begin with a poem, written in Greek, hidden beneath a child's school desk. In 425, Emperor Theodosius II, a descendant of Constantine, established the University of Constantinople. Instruction was in Greek, with a curriculum including Homer's poetry, Sophocles' tragedies, Plato's philosophy, and classical rhetoric. This was not merely an educational institution. It was a declaration that the new empire chose Greek as its memory. When Rome conquered Greece, they seized not only land, but also the educational system. Yet within it, an invisible counterattack had begun. In classrooms across Achaea, students were still taught Homer's poetry, Euripides' tragedies, and Plato's philosophy in their original language. A Greek child, even while wearing a Roman toga, still recited poetry in ancient tones. In Alexandria, scholars quietly continued to take notes in Greek. Copies were made, passed hand to hand through small libraries. Rome could burn books, but each Greek scholar was a living library. Once, a farmer in Boeotia was arrested for carving a line of Hesiod's poetry on his house wall. He claimed he didn't intend to defy the law, only that it was beautiful. But that beauty, in Rome's eyes, was an act of defiance. In Corinth, priests still held the Dionysia festival according to the old calendar, not the Julian one. And the people attended in greater numbers, more silently, more reverently, as a form of resistance through memory. Roman scholars noted that many Greek youths did not learn Latin, even though it cost them advancement opportunities. They chose to remain with their mother tongue. This wasn't ignorance. It was a way to protect themselves through language. In cemeteries across the Aegean, many tombstones bore only Greek inscriptions, not a single line in Latin. On the grave of a potter, it read, "I was born Greek, I die still so." Philostratus, a Greek scholar living under Roman rule, wrote Life of Apollonius of Tyana as a way to revive classical Greek ideals. In that work, he did not praise Caesar or any Roman gods. Instead, he crafted the image of Apollonius as a wandering philosopher, wise and brave, like Socrates, reborn in the age of empire. It was not just a biography, but a manifesto, that Greek knowledge had not died, merely awaited to be heard again. In many cities, ancient plays were still quietly performed in crumbling theatres or temple courtyards. Works like Antigone, Prometheus Bound, or Orestes, with their spirit of resistance and longing for freedom, were reenacted under the guise of commemoration or cultural remembrance. But everyone understood when an actor shouted, "I do not bow to unjust laws." No one heard it as mere lines. They heard the voice of an entire people. No battles occurred on Athenian soil after Rome's arrival. But for centuries, Greeks, from scholars to artisans, fought silently through each line of text, each ritual, each relief sculpture. Because some civilizations don't need to shout to survive. They only need to whisper and have enough people remember. Uprisings don't need heroes, only memories that refuse to die. In a small town in the Peloponnese, the Romans once ordered the demolition of an old temple of Athena. But every morning, the statue was found dusted, fresh flowers placed, and oil poured into the lamp, even though no one admitted to doing it. The village elders said, "The goddess doesn't need to speak, only to be present." Those actions, so small they were hard to detect, were the strongest declaration. Greek faith hadn't vanished. It had quietly blended into daily life like an unending prayer. At a school in Smyrna, a hand-drawn map was discovered beneath the floor. Nothing seemed unusual until one noticed. The map's center wasn't Rome, but Delos, the sacred island of Apollo. Even in imperial times, the teacher had drawn the map as Greeks once believed, as if Rome had never been the world center. It was a deviation of a few inches on paper, but a deviation of centuries in the heart. When Emperor Constantine set foot in Byzantium and renamed it Constantinople, no one thought this would be the final counterattack, not with spears and swords, but with a shift in perspective. The Roman Empire, which had expanded from west to east, suddenly turned around and placed its new center in an old Greek city. This wasn't a coincidence. Constantinople wasn't just a strategic choice, it was a cultural one. Here, Constantine built not only a capital, but a Roman replica of the East. At the Forum of Constantine, he erected many old statues brought from Athens, Antioch, and Ephesus, including a replica of the statue of Athena Parthenos, once worshipped in the Parthenon. Placing the Greek goddess of wisdom at the heart of a new Christian capital was both strange and profound, as if he were rebuilding the empire, but this time with the soul of Athens. Columns like in Athens, squares like in Delphi, libraries like in Alexandria, and Greek, not Latin, gradually became the primary language of the Eastern administration. With the Edict of Milan, 313 AD, Constantine legalized Christianity. At the Council of Nicaea in 325, under his leadership, bishops from across the empire gathered, not to wage war, but to debate. But the way they debated, based on formal logic, metaphysical concepts, and rationality, was deeply rooted in Greek philosophy. From terms like homoousios, of the same substance, to dualistic thinking, all showed that, even when discussing God, they still used the language of Plato and Aristotle. On the foundation of the new Christianity, he laid the old Greek philosophy as its base. The church like a polis, priests like philosophers, and the Bible translated into Koine Greek. Many scholars call this the moment when Greece won, while seemingly dead, because from being the conquered, Greece became the foundation to build an entire half of a new empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantium. In Constantinople, schools were established to teach Homer's poetry alongside the Bible. Monks copied Plato's texts beside the New Testament, and the frescoes inside churches still preserve the symbolic style of ancient Greek art. No one loudly declared that Greece had revived, but in every arch of the church, in every lit manuscript, in every child reading poetry in the Aegean accent, we saw it. Constantine didn't bow to Athens. He quietly walked toward it. Not every resurrection begins with death. Some things only need to be looked at again, to live. The Greeks lost land. They lost their city-states, their autonomy, their freedom, by every political definition. But thousands of years later, we still read Plato in college, still quote Sappho on social media, and still call a great play a Greek tragedy. If they were defeated, why does their language still live? If their name was erased, why do we still read them to understand who we are? Rome won with the sword, but Greece won with language, with poetry, with statues, with ideas. They didn't need to keep the borders. They only needed to plant a seed in the mind and wait. When an empire falls, it leaves behind rubble. When a civilization is defeated, it leaves behind a question. Greece wasn't the victor. They were the survivor. They slipped into the bricks of Rome, into the doctrines of the church, into the layout of the university. And they didn't need to be named, to be heard, because in the end, what remains isn't the throne, but the language used to tell the story of that throne. And among all the languages ever used to tell stories, ancient Greek is the one that still echoes whenever we ask, what is freedom? Not all survivors are victors, but Greece, by never disappearing, has become a voice that cannot be silenced.